We'll go ahead and get started. Dick, you don't happen to know how many people signed up for this, do you?
I can check. Give me just a second.
All right, thanks. Yeah, that'll give us a sense of whether we have everybody.
$29 people registered, so we might be waiting on a few more people.
Okay. You said 29? Okay. Well, we'll get ahead and get started. There obviously may be some people, and based on the previous sessions, a few people will be, coming in here as we're moving along. All right, this is the August Academy. As you know, this is an opportunity and I would ask folks if you would mute until we get to the point of asking questions. Just extraneous noise, dogs, crying children, that kind of thing. Until we get to the point of kind of open discussion questions. So this is part of the August Academy. This is intended to provide both new leaders in League of Women Voters of Minnesota and current leaders with information about functions, resources, policies, good practices that we have in the League of Women Voters Minnesota to help you be effective in your leagues and in your service to voters. This session is talking about the People Powered Fair Maps program. The objective of this is to, some of you have been heavily involved in this for some time. Some of you may be pretty new and not sure what People Powered Fair Maps campaign is, a program, and why we're doing it and what it means. So I'm going to give just a really brief overview of what this program is, why we have it, what it means, and what's going on in the redistricting process. Nick Harper is here, obviously, and Nick, as our civic engagement director, he can speak much more eloquently than I can about the legislative process, litigation, the courts, and so on. So I'll talk about kind of, the program and what's going on. Nick will then talk about, other aspects of that folks may be interested in about litigation, legislation, where all that goes forward. And I'll also talk a little bit about what we're doing statewide with the Our Maps Minnesota campaign. One of the things I like to say, and some of you may have heard me say this before, is, a long time ago, I came to really embrace the power of water. And the power of water is that it is a steady and irresistible force that creates change. I think change that is done suddenly, radically, has a large tendency to cause reaction and isn't sustainable. So it's critical to work over the long term to enact the changes that we're talking about here with how redistricting is done in Minnesota and many of the other things that are policy interests of the League of Women Voters. So, I think this quote, the stream always wins, and it's not through strength by perseverance. And so what we need to do is understand that we may not have the most strength at any point in time, but we have to persevere in order to be successful in what we're trying to do. So just ask you to keep that in mind as we go through this. Couple of slides, just because I think it's helpful to for a visual support of what I'm talking about. So what is the People Power Fair Maps program and why is it? Part of the why is that the drawing of congressional legislative district lines to advantage one group over another is really as old as our country. And I used to date this back to 1812, and that's what you typically hear with the gerrymandering and Eldridge Gerry or Gary, excuse me, in Massachusetts. But really all the way back to the first congressional election in 1789, James Madison was running for Congress in Virginia. Now, he had just helped write the Constitution. And a lot of folks in Virginia did not like a strong federal government. And so they wrote the district lines. The legislature, which my recollection is Patrick Henry was the Speaker of the legislature, House of Delegates in Virginia. They drew the lines. They put James Madison, James Monroe in the same district. And James Monroe is a very popular, young, dynamic politician, leader, war hero. And result was that James Madison won, but not by a lot. And so really it goes back to the beginning of the country where one set of interests have tended to be favored over another. In the last 10 to 15 years, with the computerization of drawing and mapping and crunching and analyzing data, that makes it much easier to effectively draw maps favoring a given group. In the Wisconsin redistricting in 2011-12, they ran millions of sample maps in order to ensure a unbreakable majority for the Republican Party. Now, again, like I said, every party does this, but the recent past, computerization, data management, all of that makes it just much, much easier to do. One side example, there's a great article, and I'm trying to remember where I read it, but there was a high school group in Pennsylvania at a private school. They had a Princeton University's Princeton gerrymandering project, had a contest for who can draw the most stealth gerrymandered map. In other words, a map that was gerrymandered but didn't look like it. And that group of high school students, using a online free application, Dave's Redistricting app, drew a map of Ohio that guaranteed the Democratic Party a majority of the congressional seats in Ohio. And they're nice, square, contiguous districts. It looks all very well ordered, but in fact, it does not reflect the partisan composition of the state of Ohio. It might be something that as a map would get thrown out because it may not provide adequate minority representation, but on the surface, on the first and second looks, it looks like a really good map. So that tells you that if high school students using online free software draw the map that give Democrats an advantage in Ohio, think what any interest group, any political party with millions of dollars and sophisticated applications like Maptitude or S3 can do. And that's, in fact, the world we live in. Part of the problem is in 2019, many of you may be familiar with Rucho v. Common Cause. There were two cases before the Supreme Court, one for a Democratic gerrymander in Maryland, one for a Republican gerrymander in North Carolina. That had been kicked back to the appeals courts a couple of times, went to the Supreme Court in June 2019, and the Supreme Court, in a surprise to me, it's me speaking for myself, I was not surprised that the Supreme Court didn't want to take it on. I was surprised with how stunningly they just said, not our job. They said the federal courts have no role in partisan gerrymandering. And so I think Justice Kagan wrote an excellent dissent in that, which actually was important in North Carolina and the pursuit in the state courts. But I was surprised, but it really is similar to a Supreme Court case from 1946, where the court at that time said redistricting is a partisan thicket that the Supreme Court doesn't belong in. So to some extent, we've been here before, but at the same time, I was surprised that they just so emphatically said not the federal court's job. So over the last 30 years, that's where people have gone with issues over redistricting as to the federal courts. And that's no longer an option. That is not a safeguard. And so that means every state has to work this out on their own. And in the wake of that, League of Women Voters of the United States identified a nationwide initiative to review existing redistricting processes in all 50 states to address the potential for partisan gerrymandering and to ensure creation of fair maps. So that's how we got here. There's lots of depth to that, but That's how we got here. One of the things is just, I want this group to be clear in your minds about why is gerrymandering bad. So when somebody says, hey, what's the problem with gerrymandering? Why should I care? Manipulated maps, and we see lots of examples of this in lots of states. I think the one I've got a case study for, a story for, is Michigan, which is probably most stark, where gerrymandering, and Wisconsin's another really good example, where gerrymandered maps create safe partisan districts where those elected officials represent the political base and party activists and not the voters. Now, if you think back to our mission as the League of Women Voters, is empowering voters, defending democracy. If a system is in place, which results in the elected officials not being accountable to the voters, but to their partisan base, we have not supported empowered voters, and we're not defending democracy. So that's part one. The other part is it's an unfair distribution of power that doesn't reflect the will of the voters. The problem with not having a holistic look at our maps in Minnesota, our maps, at least since 1990, have been drawn by the courts, and prior to that, they've been at least rejected by the courts with guidance and adjustments that have been done, is we've had incremental changes to our maps in Minnesota, congressional maps, legislative maps. At the same time, there have been seismic changes in the demographics of Minnesota, immigrants, minorities, differences in growth and population in different areas. And because of that incremental nature of changing and redistricting, those maps probably don't accurately reflect the demographic makeup and the policy desires of the people of Minnesota. Remember, the courts are there to make the maps legal. They're not there to make policy. And so that's the problem with our current system, and why we still likely, while we do not have gerrymandering in Minnesota, I will say again, we do not have gerrymandering in Minnesota, at least not at the state level. There is an unfair distribution of power because you have not had the influence and input of voters into how those maps are made. And then finally, it skews the political process to create extreme policy outcomes, extreme policy choices, and unfair policy outcomes. Two examples real quickly in our neighbors, Michigan, some of you heard me talk about the, the name just flew out of my head, the water supply in, what am I trying to think of? Detroit, not Detroit.
Boundary waters up by Duluth.
Flint, Michigan, Flint.
Flint, thanks.
Flint.
Oh,
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it was just like it. Thanks, Gay. It just flew out of my head. But anyway, Flint, Michigan, where the voters clearly did not want emergency managers in place to make decisions like that, but the legislature just said, we don't care. We're not accountable to you. We're accountable to our partisan base, and they did it anyway. Wisconsin, clearly the people of Wisconsin did not want a number of things that were done there with regards to schools, unions, some of the things around public health, but yet the party that has ensured itself to stay in power because of its partisan control of the redistricting process has been able to do that. Now, one other thing I'm going to tell you is that gerrymandering is not a 10-year problem. It is a multi-decade problem, because you think about Wisconsin, that legislature that is gerrymandered to be Republican, and again, I'm not being partisan, it's just a fact, that is the same legislature that will draw the maps this year. Now, they do have a Democratic governor, which means he can veto it, but now you're at a stalemate. So we're not getting drawing of maps that reflects the will of the public. It's the will of one party, and then whatever is used to counter that in the courts. Again, the Wisconsin courts will likely not make policy, but at the same time, the Wisconsin courts are highly partisan. And that's a byproduct of their partisan gerrymandering. So it takes multiple decades unless there's a change in how redistricting is done to fix that. I credit Nick with this redistricting elements to think about as we think about redistricting is people, principles, process, the people who make the decisions and draw the maps. And with Minnesota, like most cases, 31, 32 other states, the people drawing the maps are the same elected officials who will benefit and be elected from those maps: legislators, county commissioners, city council members. And I find it when I talk to people across the ideological spectrum, I say, hey, does it make sense for people to draw the maps that are also going to be the maps by which they get elected? Universally, people say, no, that doesn't make sense. Now, the people who think it does make sense are elected representatives. Many of them because they honestly feel they can do that and they can make those decisions, and I trust them. But the reality is the control of that process is not going to be in their hands. It's going to be in the party's hands. So that's something to keep in mind, is how our system currently is set up to work by our state constitution. Principles are what needs to be considered to make a map fair. And just want to say it's more than the legal minimum. You can draw an infinite number of maps that meet the legal requirements for equal population and contiguous and convenient from a state standpoint and so on. But they can have very different effects on representation. And then the process, and mostly it's how is public input, involvement, and review part of the process. Minnesota is among the worst in the country. There's a National Conference of State Legislators report, nonpartisan group, but they go through all the states that have various things in statute or in our constitution for public input, public review, public comment, public challenge. Minnesota has none of those things, none. It's a very opaque process. So why don't we have a problem? Well, the problem is the current system, which is by the Constitution of Minnesota, the legislature draws the maps, the governor approves them. That process has not worked. Arguably ever has not worked, not since the 1800s. And the world was very different back in the 1800s. That's Peter Watson. Well, I heard him recently at a conversation. He mentioned the 1800s. And I think Peter's probably right, because you have to go back to the 1960s. The maps ever since about 1960 on have been rejected or drawn by the courts. The state did not draw new legislative maps between 1913 and 1959. So you have to go all the way back to the 1800s or early 1900s for the last time the state drew a set of legislative maps. So just let that sink in. There's no tradition of nonpartisan fair redistricting in Minnesota except through the courts. The system that we have, which the courts draw it, is not the system is intended by a constitution. And if one party controls all three branches of government, the House, the Senate, the governor's mansion, is not what we'll get. And reality is, if you go all the way back to 1960, every decennial, when we have the census and redistricting, there is some split in the party composition of those three bodies, the House, the Senate, the governor's mansion. In the year 2000, different party had each one of those because Governor Ventura was the governor. So it's always been split. They can't make agreement. It's not been approved by the courts. The courts are drawing it. It's not reflective of the policy interest, the demographics of people in Minnesota. We can't get help from the federal courts. The Minnesota Constitution, you can argue whether there's words in there, but it's not clear. And as Nick has told me and other lawyers I know say, you don't want to go to court and test that because you never know what's going to happen. And so what I say is we're relying on divided government. And I would tell you that there's a lot of folks out there who would like you and the public to believe that our current system works, where every 10 years we have divided government and the courts draw the maps. But the reality is that is not how our system is supposed to work. The system is supposed to be the legislature and the governor. So as soon as we have the legislature and the governor, all of one party, whichever party, then those maps are going to be drawn to some partisan benefit, no matter what the good intentions of our individual representatives. So we're really playing a game of Russian roulette, and I'm working on different metaphors for this to communicate. At some point, we're going to have, trifecta. One party's going to control it. The round will be in the chamber. We're going to get gerrymandered. We'll be decades in recovery. So that's the conversation. That's the importance. If you've not been exposed to this previously, I just want to make sure you had that understanding. Anything before I move on to kind of where we are now and what our plans are going forward? All right, hearing none. The current status, from where we were at the beginning of the year, really no changes legislatively. A couple of bills were heard in the House and the Senate. No action was taken, no change in the rules and statute. Legislative Redistricting Committee hearings. The Senate had their first hearing yesterday, which is great. I know a number of us have listened to that. Really, it's an opportunity for them to take testimony about public inputs, public concerns around districting. So that's a positive. There's no word on the House. I don't know, Nick, have you heard anything from the House? Yeah, shaking your head.
Not a word.
Yeah. Litigation, because as we say, this is going to get decided in the courts. Lead lawsuit, like many of you know, it was filed by Peter Watson in February. We have been added as a co-plaintiff on that. That gives us the opportunity to be at the table working with Peter Watson and his team, and that's the we here is Nick and the league by extension, to influence what gets presented. DFL, Republican Party, Common Cause have all filed actions, and won't go into what they are, but they're all now party in one way or another the suit, or they're before the court to become a party. One thing I didn't put in here, the special redistricting panel, which is the panel of current judges assigned by the Supreme Court Chief Justice, was established in June. They have been working because they have issued some orders. So they are at work. They have a tentative date for hearings in October. I'll talk about that in the timeline. So, I mean, that process is moving. And if I was to put all my money on one thing happening, it's going to be maps going to be issued by the court on February 15, 2022, because that's the statutory date on which new legislative congressional districts have to be approved in order to support the remainder of the election cycle in 2022. And that is consistent with what the court has done in the last two decennials in 2012 and 2002. So that's what we expect to happen. That's litigation. Again, the legislative committee hearings are a great place to provide testimony, to let elected leaders know what we think ought to be done and how they ought to be looking at redistricting. It's highly unlikely that's going to have any meaningful impact on redistricting. The one caveat to that is that should either chamber draw maps, which is kind of a long shot at this point, those maps could be introduced to the court and could be used by the court special redistricting panel for consideration drawing maps. So that's one thing, we don't want to discount the legislative redistricting committee, but at the same time, we want to be realistic about what we're going to get out of that. It's really more visibility, it's engagement, it's the potential. There's some maps that go to the court. Here's the timeline where we are today. August 12th, Thursday, we will see the census block data. That is the data that is used to do redistricting. That is in what's called the legacy format. All that means is that's the format of the data used in 2000, 2010. It's not compatible with the current tools, but and it's hard to use by the public, but it does have everything needed to do redistricting. Fortunately, the Minnesota State Demographer's Office, Dr. Susan Brower, if you know her, and also the vendors, people like the Tufts University as Districtor, which we use for our online free mapping, and also Caliper, which runs Maptitude, which we have access to through League of Women Voters US, and other applications. They're going to be mostly converting that data. So most places, most states are going to have what they need to do redistricting by the end of next week. So just think about the end of next week, people are going to have the data in order to draw those legally enforceable districts. Legislative hearings, I said they're in progress from the Senate. We'll wait and hear what happens with the House. The special redistricting panel, they put in a recent order a tentative date of October 11th. We expect that to be final here in early September. They've got a rule on some other things with people kind of intervening and so on to the suit. I want to just continue to emphasize local redistricting as opportunity to engage communities, engage elected leaders to really be advocating for public involvement, transparency in drawing districts. And I won't go on any more about that because I've many of you have heard me on this. But again, that local redistricting is a great opportunity to engage members, engage the public, and connect with elected leaders and build some of that muscle memory or understanding of the importance of public involvement, transparency, and teach elected officials who may move on to higher office, about those things. And then local redistricting will be done here in February. I talked about the final redistricting order. And then local redistricting hearings in February through April. You see there, city redistricting will be done in March. And then county and school board redistricting for those places that have that will be done in April. So that's the timeline. So it's on us. We're there. And we've been seeing this for a year and a half, and it's now on us, and the opportunity to be involved is here. The challenge of the PPFM program, and it's complicated. All right. How many of you and I have done, and I think there's an Alanis Morissette song. I mean, it's complicated, so it's hard to explain. It's hard to engage people. It's hard. It's hard because, you have to engage a lot of legislators, a lot on different parties. You have to connect with the public. It's something that doesn't lend itself to easy fixes. Ideally, we do amend the Constitution, which is hard. But I would tell you, the League of Women Voters has been doing hard stuff for over 100 years. So if it's critical to our democracy and our vote and our representation, then we can do this. And then the next thing is there's no quick fix. Going to the courts is kind of like looking for the quick fix. I am all for HR1 and SR1, for the For the People Act. At the same time, there's no quick fix for that. Because as the Supreme Court said, this is really a matter for the states. And so we have to go state by state. And I'll also tell you that any gain we get is going to be challenged by people who want to recover power, recover control. So it's a continuing battle. In Michigan, where they passed a citizen referendum, and for any of you seen trying to remember the name of the movie, Slay the Dragon. That was about Michigan. They finally got a citizen referendum passed, but then they had to battle a lot of court challenges to who could be on the panel and what could the panel do. And it's just, and that's something that's going to continue to be challenged. Missouri passed in 2018 a citizen referendum to create a less political avenue for drawing redistricting maps. Well, the legislature turned around and put an item on the ballot in 2020 that would then reverse much of that gain, return a lot of that power back to the legislature, and then, return it. So we're never done. It's not a quick fix. It's currently not an issue in Minnesota. So people can get real excited about things such as climate, which is important. It's the air we breathe, the water we drink, about social justice, racial equity, which are all important, voting rights, which are under attack, the integrity of our elections, lots of other things. So redistricting us, we don't currently have a problem in Minnesota, and courts have done it for decades. It's not something that has a sense of urgency. The problem is it's like when your house catches on fire. It's really important once it's on fire. But if you tell people, hey, if you don't take care of this problem, your house is going to catch on fire and may, in fact, burn down, they may be more likely to take action, or they may kick the can down the road because they say, well, it's too hard. It's not quick. It's complicated, whatever. So I want to encourage you, I just want to openly acknowledge these are challenges. And also believe that a lot of people in Minnesota, including some of our members, are complacent. It's not a problem. It's hard. Hasn't happened here. We always have divided government. And some of that complacency is being fed by some policymakers because they go, oh, everything's fine, and lulling us into this sense of security that this is how it's always going to work until it doesn't. So it can happen here. It does have a dramatic impact on policy, as you've seen in some of these other states. And just need to look at our neighbor next door in other states like Michigan and Pennsylvania and so on. And in fact, there's many states that are gerrymandered. Those are just the most dramatic by way of difference in changes in policy that were made due to the way maps are drawn at one point in time. But I would suggest there are lots of states with maps that are drawn in such a way to not accurately reflect the will of the voters, the people. So our focus area based on that, this is this year and into early next year. Engage, educate, mobilize communities to advocate for public involvement, transparency, and consideration of community interests. This is all the way from, the state level and our work with our Maps Minnesota campaign, which is a campaign across Minnesota of partnered groups to support communities of interest and representing their voices, primarily communities of color and underrepresented communities, before the legislature, then the courts and other organizations, other bodies, and how maps are drawn. So that's a large part of this. And some of you know, I spent a lot of my time with the Our Maps Minnesota campaign on mapping. Nick is helping out with that. A number of other folks, they're on this call, Kathy Lund from Crystal New Hope, Linda Smith from Edina, Bruce Pomerantz from Anoka Blaine, Coon Rapids. So it's a number of different folks, but there are 40 to 50 mapping sessions we're supporting, mostly here in August. So a lot of time and work to support them, and allyship, and really being supportive of those communities. So, and part of this is working, and Michelle Whitty in particular, and I to some extent, but are working with local leagues to identify, connect with community groups and organizations to work on redistricting, but also to create lasting partnerships. This is something that redistricting is going to be with us for a while as an issue, and really I would say forever, but we have a specific thing we need to address in the short term with maps, in the longer term with changing the process. And that's an opportunity to partner with those groups and extend those partnerships to other issues. We want to influence state and local map development through public input and testimony. As I mentioned at hearing in Bemidji this week, we were reaching out, Nick, to see if we could find local league members who are interested in testifying. We expect that Senate committee will go to each congressional district. And so again, we're going to be looking for members of the league as constituents, as voters who are willing to testify in those hearings. We're primarily interested in reinforcing and supporting and lifting up the messages of communities of color and underrepresented communities, but also in representing our own communities where we're able to articulate and put that forward. And this is in the legislature, the court redistricting panel, and local governments. And finally, we're supporting litigation to advance both the League of Women Voters Minnesota's interests and also Our Maps Minnesota goals for community representation. We feel that by being a party to the lawsuit as a co-plaintiff, we can help to emphasize those policy choices in what is put forward in that lawsuit to be supportive of the communities of color, and that those specific interests are being brought through a separate suit. But we want to make sure that the interests of that group are also being supported and through our efforts. So what happens after February of next year, April of next year? Well, our focus going forward is to continue to advocate for change in the redistricting process, to minimize public and political influence and maximize public engagement and transparency. So this is just a step along the path. We've got much greater public engagement. We've got good member engagement. We've reached out to a lot of people. We've reached out to a lot of legislators. So I think that we've done a lot of good things, thousands of postcards sent to legislators and local officials. Lots of opportunity here to work with other communities and get them involved and them understanding and interested in redistricting and why it's important, and then building those partnerships, and then opportunities still to engage in local redistricting. So I think there's a lot we will have done. This provides a foundation and a stepping off point for the next phases so that we can continue to work to change how this is done for the state. And then the other thing is to continue to educate, and mobilize voters for change in the redistricting process. So I think that's what I want to leave you with as we go forward. Some things for options for action, postcards, campaign letter, emails, support for hearings, emphasizing principles that place focus on minority representation in communities of interest, partnering. So this is some things at the state level for the hearings. I should change that because we know now it is summer, fall, and it's in progress. The courts partner with other organizations to develop testimony. One of the great things in my view about testifying at the legislative committee is it's a great way to practice and develop your story for the court-based hearing, which is really going to be the most important in the redistricting process. And again, focusing on community policy interest and impact of maps on representation. Ideal is that you have a community map, community of interest map, but that's not absolutely necessary. You can talk about how the current maps do or don't work for you. You can talk about how you'd like the maps to look. You can talk about what your community is in a more general way and where that ought to be represented and what other communities are like yours. If you're in one of the suburban or out of suburban districts, your lines are going to change. And so then a question you got to ask is, am I more similar, or my interests more like the rural interests that are further out toward greater Minnesota? Or are they more similar to those first ring, second ring suburbs? And I can't answer that for you. That's a question you got to answer for yourself. But all those lines, almost all those lines are going to move, because even if your district is the right population, the districts that further out from you have too few people, they're going to get bigger. The districts further into the metro areas have too many people, and they're going to get smaller. So your lines are going to move. Wherever you are, your lines are going to move. If you start with that assumption, then you're going to be thinking about this correctly. So don't think this won't touch you and won't impact you. Local redistricting, we can talk more about that if people are interested. And there's a whole range of local responses on this. Mostly that people are getting steered to staffs, city staff, county staff. The staffs will only do what's legal and what they're told by the elected officials. They will do what they've done in the past, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because that's what's required. That's what their process is. And those laws really haven't changed much, if at all. So expect that that's going to be a response, but it's helpful to know the mechanics and how things have worked in the past. But if you want things done that go beyond the legal minimums of, making sure there's, equal population within whatever the statute says, that they're following precinct boundaries, that they are respecting, as to the degree required by statute, city and county boundaries, let's say this. So, you're going to have to ask the elected officials if you want more opportunity for public input, if you want to have the opportunity for the public to input maps or testimony to ahead of them drawing draft maps. You're going to have to ask your county commissioners, your city council members. So again, be polite, be persistent, but understand that's where they're going to start most likely. And then a community, this is again, building partnerships with community members. There's a great, Nick and I had the good fortune of being with the Islamic Civic Society of America yesterday afternoon for a community mapping. And the imam pointed out that the second word in that title is civic. And so they're trying to educate their community on the how government works and what their role is and what their opportunity and power is within that structure. So there's a huge civic education component to this, where we can work with those community groups who may not have been actively involved in government issues, elections in the past, may not have a tradition of that personally or within their community, to help them understand how to be involved and why it's important, and grow that base that will, outside of the League of Women Voters, partner with us and support us in making these changes. Reviewing existing maps, letters to the editor, and considering partnering with other groups. So those are some of the things that you can do. Again, lots of depth below that. One thing I'm going to show you, and give me one moment here, a resource for you. Kristen Smith recently updated our People Fair Maps page on the League site. This top section is the same as we've been. This middle section here is kind of update on our campaigns and programs. Again, working with the Our Maps campaign, the People Fair Maps program, and then some things to learn more. Here's a just outstanding, and I'm not saying this because he's on the call, but it's just an outstanding series of videos Nick did to explain mapping and communities of interest and how maps are drawn. Welcome to Hexland. It's really, really well done. There's some information here about the lawsuit. We joined the Watson v. Simon lawsuit, and then a link to the People Power Fair Maps action kit. And then there's the rest of the information that was here before. Lots of stuff there. I personally have some action to update this, but that's probably a September thing after we get done with mapping this month. So I just, if you're looking for more resources to learn more, if you're steering people in your community to someplace, this is a great place. And again, these are YouTube videos, and really highly recommend taking a look at those. If people there is, Nick, all told was like 3.5 hours.
I'm sorry.
How long are all the videos together?
I want to say 2.5 to 3.
Okay.
Hopefully, I'm hoping it's on the shorter end. Hopefully it's entertaining no matter what.
It is. And for the most part, they're pretty short, like 20 to 30 minutes. So it's pretty easy. But again, I highly recommend that. And, that's on our website, same place you would normally find this kind of stuff. So with that, I'll open up for questions. I see a lot of folks I know here and some folks I don't know so much, and Nick will help me. And so if you want to raise your hand, they did put a feature now in the bottom right in the reactions where you can raise your hand. So you see where my hand went up. You can actually do it, which is much better than having to go into the contacts, the participants thing. Yeah, Betty.
I don't have a question so much as a comment about complacency. And I think we just had National Night Out, last week, and I was talking with my neighbors and that. And in the suburbs, I see a lot of complacency about redistricting, and they think that doesn't really affect me, But, and I think, and this is just my own opinion, but I think in order to address that complacency, we need people to understand that redistricting is at the base of electoral college power. And if you want to affect your own power at the electoral college level, you have to be interested in what happens with this redistricting.
Great. Thanks, Betty. Question in the chat from Jan is about will there be PPFM courts cards for this late summer and fall? Short answer, yes. My intention, and just if you're on the leadership video this morning with Michelle and Laura, Michelle talked about the all member news. That all member news gets really chock-a-block with information. And so I haven't put it in there, but our intent is after Labor Day to revitalize, reinstitute the postcards, primarily focused on local officials. I still have 1,500 to 2,000 cards and mat and stamps and so on. And so if you want cards this fall, and I'll send that out to our People Power Fair Maps Task Force, just letting them know. And then at the same time, I'll work with Michelle to let the presidents know if they want to pass that on. So that's the plan. And also, if you had comments, like Betty, if there's something that you see or you think, this is, Nick and I do not have a corner on all the ideas. If there's something you think you see, please let us know.
Excuse me, this is Ralph Carr from St. Cloud area. I'm wondering when the block data will be available to us at the local level, and will you have some workshops on how to use that in order to actually see how we can make our own maps?
Well, that's a great question, Ralph. I had not thought about that, but I think that's a great idea. Our focus has been, just to step back, our focus has been on community maps, because that is what's easiest for most folks rather than trying to go through the district mapping. But at the same time, there may be folks who want to do district mapping. or want to use the current census data. Let me make a plan for that. It'll probably be after the 1st of September, just because of everything we're doing with our maps campaign and the community mapping for them. After, I'll put the plan together. And Ralph, are you on our PPFM task force email list?
No, I'm not. I should.
You want to be on it? It's no commitment required. This is like one of those, yeah, just sign up and we're not going to ask you to pay anything.
Okay.
I'll add you to the list. That way I know that you're getting that information. And then if you're interested, great. If you're not, that's fine. But it's just, the idea of the PPFM task force, part of the folks, and like Mary Jones, who's on here, and who's a local league contact and really critical there. Kathy Lund, who's on here, she's one of our mappers, and so she's really critical. Jan Forkrut is a local league contact. So there's a lot of folks who are local league contacts, folks who are interested in presenting, but other folks just want the information. And what I'm counting on is that if people stay in touch with this, they will see an opportunity, or something will catch their attention, just like what you said. And that'll enable them to get more involved, and then potentially get other people involved. So, I am more than happy to keep giving people information if they want it. And if you don't, then I'm okay with that too.
Yeah. And Ralph, can you clarify for me, were you asking about for local districts, like city council and county commissioner?
Actually, yes, that's what we're very intensely involved in right now.
Yeah. Okay.
We have actually met with staff members for both the county and the city of St. Cloud. And it turns out that they really are the ones who are drawing the maps independent of the elected officials at this point, which I find, or at least that they intend to do that. They aren't not.
I was gonna say,
right
for now, I think is maybe the key phrase to add. Because it will get the final approval of, the county commissioners or the city council, which is, it is what it is. So they might have some last minute edits that they feel strongly about. But I actually have some ideas in my mind about how we can do that. So there's not, mapping software tends to be very expensive. There are a couple of free options that we can point you to. Most of them are also focused on legislative and congressional redistricting, but I can see what might be an option for local. So I'm actually.
Yeah, and I did ask the folks at Tufts to create a city map for St. Cloud and a county map for Stearns County. They haven't gotten to it yet. The other thing I'll add is we do have a access to a license for Maptitude. So I've got that license. So that's not something I can necessarily pass off to you, although there may be.
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem is I don't know that we'll be able to have everybody access that as they need it.
Yeah.
As I'm trying to think of I am looking at Days Redistricting. So Days Redistricting is a free online, you don't even have to download software, mapping program. And I am at the moment, let me see if I can. Yeah, so I just created, we can create a way to, like, a little video showing you how to start it. But I am currently making a map of Rochester City Council. So that is possible. And I say making in the sense that, like, I have a map of the city that I can start making districts. I don't know where the lines would go, but if I wanted to, I could make up something. And I'm sure that you can do that for St. Cloud City Council as well as Stearns County County Commissioner Board. So that might be an option. We can kind of show people how to do Days Redistricting. I'll send people, I'll put in the chat the link to Days Redistricting, and we can create something to show you specifically how to do the local mapping.
And Nick, maybe you and I can talk outside here about how our direction on that. Just
yeah, we'll have to because it's not going to be as simple as just like, here's the thing, go for it. It's right. There's going to be I think it'd be helpful for us to talk. I think Ralph, I'm trying to remember
St. Cloud, is that Jan McLucky?
No, Linda Kotzevar is our key
Oh,
contact.
Linda Kochevar, thank you. Yeah, she and I have swapped emails, and I've talked to her a week or so ago, and we talked about the discussions you've had with the city council and the county staff and staffs and all that. So yeah, and I owe Linda some stuff back. But what you're saying about drawing maps, absolutely. And because I know, especially at the county level, there's been some concern. And Nick and I yesterday were talking about cities that are divided between congressional districts or legislative districts. And I think St. Cloud also falls into that category. So no, that's great. And that's the kind of thing we want to know, specific cities that have high interest, high vulnerability, high benefit, and St. Cloud's one, Rochester's one, Duluth is one, that there's a lot of interest, and we want to help people out with that. Others?
And it looks like actually St. Cloud is on our list of, if your league wants to do a community of interest mapping, not a district mapping, but COI, we would love to do that because that'll help us figure out what we do for the legislative, where those legislative lines, because I can tell you right now, there's going to be a question about how, if St. Cloud gets split up, if Stearns County gets split up, and if so, how, for not only state legislative, but also congressional districts potentially. So we would really love to do a COI mapping event up there with the league and anyone, who wants to participate in any organization in the St. Cloud area.
Other questions or other suggestions or comments?
Is anyone here from Carver County? No volunteers. All right, that's a bummer. Carver County is also on the list of places where there will be major changes, and so we would like to hold an event there, hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah, and Nick, I have a program up there. I was trying to figure out when it is, but I do have a program up in Carver County.
Oh yeah, that's right. It's in a week or two, isn't it?
Yep.
That's right.
So yeah, but that's good. I mean, because
I was just looking through the list.
Yeah, and just again, going back to Betty's point, the more we can let people know in those suburbs, and especially the outer suburbs, hey, your lines are going to change, and you may end up with representation that's very different than what you have today. That may pique their interest. Well, hearing nothing else at this point, we'll go ahead and wrap up. I appreciate everybody being present and your interest and the comments from those who offered them and questions. And again, feel free anytime to email me, reach out to me with any questions, any support you need, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can.
I just got a quick comment from Gay. She asked if St. Louis County is on the list. It is indeed. So we hopefully will be reaching out for that. Yeah,
Ellen Wiss is the person, Gay, I've been talking to there. So Ellen, yeah, I'm overdue.
But the more the merrier. If you know people who are interested, we want to, I mean, the idea is that these COI mapping will be not just the league. It will be as big as we can get it so that we can genuinely say, we talk to a lot of people from the public, not just league members, but a large group of folk.
Can I ask a last minute question? This is Walt. I'm in Olmsted County. We're having some regular meetings with county commissioners at this point. Can you suggest what sort of messaging we should be doing with the commissioners?
You bet. I will send you some questions and comments that we have just to ask. And it's really basic about, and about what will be the opportunities for public input? Will there be public review and comment of draft maps? And then also, criteria, principles, we adopt those. We do have an example from Washington County from 10 years ago of principles. So those are just some basic things to start with. It'll probably be outside of, if they've done redistricting in the past, that'll be outside of what they've done. If they've never done redistricting, the great thing is that they won't have this is how we've always done it, thought process, and they'd be more receptive to a change. So yeah, Walt, I'll send you our list of suggested questions for local leaders.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Hearing nothing else, everyone, send you also Anna Frailing. That's Rochester, I think. Anna, I'll send that to you. Okay.
Could you send it to me too, please?
Sure, Mary. Yeah, I'm trying to Mary. Yeah, I was trying to remember who else wanted those. Yeah, so.
Okay, thank you.
You got it. All right. Well, thanks very much. And and Gay, I'll send those to Ellen, and I owe Ellen a phone call. So I think I've got an opening here for a few minutes. I'll give her a call. All right, everybody have a good rest of your afternoon. Thanks.
Thanks.